Yeah, we are back. We're cutting that out. Yeah, we were like you were explaining what a sandbox actually is.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I was talking about sandbox. So it's a term that we generally use very liberally because everyone is saying that, hey, like we are sandbox and we are trying to secure your agents. So the basic premise is that with agents, if you go into the YOLO mode or skip permissions, you could essentially give it access to system level or operating system level instructions, and it could, in the worst case, just destroy all of your files. We have already seen some
Yeah,
hilarious yet serious examples. I mean, they appear hilarious, but of course, people have lost a lot of data, critical data. So
including their emails.
yeah, yeah.
There was that one
So
thing. Yeah.
what we want to do is run these agents in a way where you limit the access, and at the same time, the sandboxing also does help with security to a certain extent.
Mm.
So in general sense, if you talk about Gemini and their sandbox mode, so in general sense, it would mean that, okay, you spin up a Docker container, you execute your code in that Docker container, get the response back, and then show it to the user, right? So this way, sometimes, because attacks can happen on both sides. So an attack could be where there's a prompt injection for you to like get access to some private data, or it could be poisoning of your model, where the model is intentionally being asked to use an unfamiliar npm package and or a Python package like a pip package,
Mm.
and it writes some untrusted code, and then you execute that code, and that code itself attacks your system, right?
Mm.
So there are like the attack vectors are both ways. One is running unsecure code, because the code being generated from the LLM, in case you're using like an untrusted LLM, then there is a high chance that someone might have poisoned the LLM. So you want to also ensure that you can run untrusted code or the code being generated in an isolated controlled environment. So generally that's the way to look at coding agents. But then these days the number of attacks or like prompt injection attacks or tool calling attacks, like those are increasing quite considerably. So what companies like Docker have kind of thought of is, so there is this concept of the Docker sandbox. It allows you to run Claude code inside of this Docker sandbox, and the way that it works is that it spins up a micro VM, and
Mm.
inside the micro VM it will run a Docker container that's running Claude code, and that's like the level of security. So now this way, you get the benefit of limiting access to your operating system because you're running inside of a container, so you're not accessing like the system processes and all of your file systems that are traditionally there for your operating system. And secondly, because you have this multi-level control, because Docker containers themselves are not impervious to external attacks. But now with
Got it.
this concept of using a micro VM, and instead of that, you're spinning up your container that runs Cloud Code. So you get this multi-layer architecture for security, which makes it slightly more secure. They're not saying that it's still 100% bulletproof, but when you have this
I think
level of
slightly is
security,
the right word here because, like, what I was thinking is like that protects my computer, that protects the file
yes,
that I have on my hard disk, but that does not protect my Gmail inbox because if
yeah,
I have the
mm,
API keys inside the sandbox, it could still do whatever it
it
wants,
could
right?
still do whatever exactly. So that is what we have seen so far. Now,
Mm.
at the same time, the sandbox could also mean a gateway plus a policy layer, right? So what we spoke about is the isolated runtime for any
Hmm.
code that the agent generates and executes. Yeah, so that is what we covered. So with the Docker sandbox or even traditional agent coding agent sandboxes, they're running it inside of a VM or a container, right? But the other way of looking at sandbox is the tool or the action sandbox, right? Which means
Hmm.
a gateway or a policy layer that mediates every single tool call that the agent is making. So there you would look at things like the allow list tools. So we spoke about the IAM policy, but for agents, where you give a very specific granular control over these are the set of tools that you're supposed to call, and these are the ones not in your allowed checklist for tool calls.
Got it.
And then you also can do things like rate limit and have maybe a human in the loop for more high risk actions. So you could introduce some kind of an approval, and you could also do things like redact sensitive outputs. So whether it's secrets or PII data, so personal identifiable
Identify.
information. Um, so you can think of it in this way, that the agent can basically ask, but then the sandbox will decide. So in this
Mm,
case, that sandbox is essentially your AI gateway, right? With the
got it.
built-in permissions and scopes. So I think like that's the two-tier architecture with where you talk about the tool or the action sandbox, and second is your compute or the execution sandbox, where you are more focused towards the code generation and execution of the code.
Got it. So you mentioned like an AI gateway. So
Yeah.
we need to explain what that is again,
Mhm.
because you mentioned, okay, now I can sandbox my tools. So does that mean that I have like a mock API for Gmail and that is provided by my AI gateway, or what does it do?
Yeah. So let's jump a bit more into what an AI gateway really is. It's nothing but an API gateway. So a traditional API gateway would be used in a cloud system, which takes
Mm,
care of things like observability. It takes care of adding your secrets, having some level of RBAC control over your different API calls that you're making. So you will traditionally have the API gateway. So there are a lot of open source ones as well, like HA proxy or Kong. These are
yeah,
traditional API gateways that you'll generally use. But now with an AI gateway, it's an extension of the API gateway, but with a lot more added security. So you'll have much more fine-grained control over what kind of LLM calls you can make or tool calls you can make, and then you'll have more API keys. You'll have built-in observability that's specific for agents and for LLMs, and then you'll have more nuanced control over your input-output tokens. And in order to answer your question about, okay, I want to like do a mock call to, like let's say my Gmail. So the way that you could look at that is, ultimately what we want to ensure is that when a user, because the security happens on both sides, right? We cannot ignore the user side of things. So
mm,
when a user is interacting with the LLM or with the agent, we also want to ensure that the user themselves have the relevant permission to make call to the agent. So we look at the scopes and permissions of the user as well, that is this user entitled to be able to make this MCP call or this tool call.
mm,
So the AI gateway will also ensure that only the users with the required permissions and scopes, so you're adding that RBAC control on the user side as well. And then can this user make a call to this particular tool, right, from this agent? So that's number one.
got it.
So the AI gateway will handle that as well. And at the same time, you can add permissions now for the agent. So within the agent, okay, for this user, these are the only set of tools that it can call, and it cannot
Mm,
call these XYZ tools. So you can go to that granular level, right? And that's where this reback or the relationship based access control that we discussed comes into picture. So with reback,
got it.
you define not just a static relationship between, okay, so because if you talk about, if you take one step back, you talk about a traditional role based access control. What does that mean? So user has his role, and this is the kind of access they can get, right? So for example,
Mm,
this user only has read and write access. This user has read, write, update access. This user only has read
got
access.
it.
So that's a very simple static relationship. But then reback introduces a much more complex relationship, where now you can say, okay, these are the users. The users has like these set of permissions, and you can add a lot more complex graph like interface for defining your relationships for users and the kind of tools that they can access. So you're adding this reback control, so you get security on both sides, from the user end, what kind
Mm,
of agent tools they can use, and then the agents
but
themselves,
also
once
for
they
the
come into
agent.
picture,
Yeah.
yeah, what kind of tools are they allowed for that specific user. So you can intertwine both sides of the user and the tools for the agents, and kind of create a more versatile uh, role-based control or this access control for your permissions and scoping. So this way, you get a lot more security. And maybe if we think about going back to your question around, okay, how can I mock this request to Gmail? So there, uh, what my understanding is that you could probably have like a test suite, because of course if you're having agents, you'll still write some tests. So you could give access. So there is this um, tool called as Agent Mail that I've come across. It's a YC startup. So what
Hmm.
they do is that they give you an entire email client just for your agents. So that could be
Got
something
it.
that you could potentially build, right? So rather than giving access to your full Gmail, you could
Hmm.
potentially give like an entire email inbox just for curated just for your agent. So
Got it.
it can work on your behalf. But okay, like if that's probably a bit overkill, you could look at a Gmail. So like let's say an SMTP request. Um, I've not personally like looked at the tool calls that are available for Gmail, but I would probably guess that in case we have like let's say being able to access your emails, being able to access or even write your emails. So I'll be very careful and add some additional permission layers over there, where, for example, the agent should only be able to access emails from a specific user, and
Mm.
that is some kind of granular control that we can add by adding specific permissions. Again, that's more logic based, because when we talk about permissions, we also talk about uh, something like open policy agent. So these policies define that, okay, when you are like let's say doing a deployment, if these are the conditions that are not met, then we won't do that deployment. So generally we used open policy agent or these rego based policies in
Mm.
terms of cloud, but you could also have some kind of granular policy based agents as well, which give you more granular control over what set of actions they can perform. So in this case of Gmail, you could have some specific policies written in rego or probably in some other open source language to
Got
give
it.
you more granular control.
I really like your analogy between AI gateway and API gateway, because what, like, among all the hype that we are seeing on coding agent and OpenClaw and this and that, what we tend to forget is there are like applications out there that deploy agents for customers to use. So if I use like open code or Claude code or something, that's one agent that runs on my machine. That's my agent, my tools, whatever. Um, OpenClaw, same story. If I connect my Gmail, I'm basically on my own. But if I deploy, like for a company, if I deploy a customer support agent, where one agent handles the input, well, the support tickets of different customers,
Mhm.
um, then I need all of that in a very more strict way. And question there is there a way to have like conditional access controls? Let's say, okay, if you ask for a refund in my customer support agent, I would issue a refund if it's less than, let's say, $100. But if it's more than that, I would get the human in the loop. Is there a standard way to express conditionals like that?
Uh, so I'm not sure if I have come across myself. I might be wrong here for like a standard way, but generally, um, you will see that there are so many different types of agent architectures, right? So you
Mm.
have your reactive agents that analyze the current situation and over time they try to improve. But then you have
Monitor
like
the
the human in the
situation.
loop.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Monitor the situation.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have human in the loop, right, where you are looking at a critical decision. So
Mm.
ultimately what people have to realize is that um, you are pairing up an agent with your existing infra. You're pairing it up with with the existing application. So generally you are going to use very similar style of um, you could say logical part, because this is the logical part, right? So as
Mm.
you mentioned that, okay, if the refund amount is less than $20, then you could just have the path of the application follow that. Okay, like let the agent itself process the
Mm.
entire. So there you could at runtime change the scope. So
Got
yes,
it.
I mean if you're using the appropriate open source tools that allow you to define what the tools and permissions that the agent will have. Of course, there is a slight risk because you're doing this at runtime. So you need to have some additional guardrails for that rather than the pre-scoped definitions. But then I do understand like the pre-scoped definitions, they limit the capabilities of the agent where you want it to be more reactive. But at the same time, it's relatively important to have that human in the loop, like especially for more critical cases like refunds, right, for larger amounts. So
Mm.
yeah, I mean that logic for when to go for, like, let's say the automated refund versus the human in the loop, that's something that you can just define as part of your application. And a lot of agent frameworks, they give you that customizability around, okay, do I want like parallel agents, or I want to have like sequential agent or human in the loop. So a lot of open source agent frameworks generally give you those type of architectures, but they also give you capability of like defining your own flow.
Yeah, got it. So I assume that most of the stuff that we talked about is about like handling uh, agents as we would handle applications. It is
Yeah.
more than just a API call to open router or wherever.
Hmm.
Like in the example of the customer support chat or something.
Yeah.
So you do also have a strong background in DevOps. So and what I try to figure out is if an agent is basically like the AI way of deploying an application, there must be standards. Like how do I deploy all of that? How do I follow DevOps practices? How would I even log and test agents, because all I'm dealing with is natural language. I assume I don't have like a standardized log format or something like that. Do I run agents over the output of LLMs, and how do I do that? How does that fit into the scheme of things we used to do with DevOps?
Yeah. So I guess one thing to note here is that you are not really reinventing the wheel when it comes to DevOps with
Mm-hmm.
agents, because as mentioned that agents are not replacing your existing systems. They are augmenting, or they're being part of your existing systems. So just imagine a scenario where you want to run a customer support chatbot and you're having the agent run everything for you. But now you still want to have a pipeline through which you get all of those input queries. So maybe you have a Apache Kafka pipeline or some kind of a pipeline defined where you're handling large number of input tickets and you're doing some level of pre-processing before you send it to the LLM. And that means that you need to have that, right? Now, if you want to scale up your agent to be able to handle like multiple queries, you need to have a good VM and have built-in auto scaling. So you're going to be using those traditional um, deployment patterns that you generally use for traditional software applications or
Mm.
microservices based applications. But yes, like there are some few things that do change, because if you think about an agent, right, it is probabilistic. So it's not your typical deterministic, because that's where agents differ from normal software, because they reason probabilistically, they dynamically decide actions, and they
Yeah.
call external tools. So from a DevSecOps, so now I'm also intentionally introducing the sec part. So if you talk
Mm.
about the DevSecOps, uh, from a security perspective, the teams should protect the inputs, they should protect the reasoning, the tool usage, the data access, and the outputs. And traditional AppSec tools or application security tools were never designed for this, right? And that is why that brings back to all of the discussion that we have had so far around the attack vectors, around all of that, right? So that's like number one. So what you're seeing is an additional addition to your traditional security, but you need to like keep account of all of these different things that we spoke about from an attack vector perspective. But at the same time, you also want to have like proper governance, right? So as part of like DevOps, you're looking at governance. You are looking at SBOMs, which are software bill of materials, and seeing like, okay, what changes were made to your software. So you want to and ensure that you have a proper audit and a compliance engine that
Yeah.
tracks things like what the agent did, what data it accessed, what kind of tools it used, what kind of decision traces it made. So this allows us to do incident investigation, regulatory compliance for agents, and debugging the agent behavior. So your observability, which is again a really important aspect of DevOps, right, needs to be enhanced so that it can also incorporate LLM inferencing observability. So with LLM inferencing, you're looking at things like your input time to first token. Because if you talk about like the transformer architecture, you are loading the encoding. Like when you're doing the encoding, you have to load it with the
Yeah.
prefill to your model, and then you get the output. So there are a lot of latency issues, but then you have guardrail protection that you need to ensure. So proper, open telemetry traces, analyzing what agent is doing, what its behavior, whether it's not consuming too many tokens. So that gives you like a lot of insights. So
And
from a
metrics. Yeah.
DevOps perspective, we're not like changing the underlying set of tools per se, but we are changing the way that we use those tools, or we are introducing some additional parameters that we can use to analyze your agents, or for that matter for LLMs. So in a similar way, when you do like on-prem LLM deployments, earlier we were not using a lot of GPUs, but today we have to use like GPUs
Mm.
from a, we are kind of steering a bit away from the core security aspects. But like if you want to run an LLM on Kubernetes, you need a GPU, and
Yeah.
then that's its own ball game on how you run multiple GPUs across a Kubernetes cluster. And in
Yeah.
order to elevate some of these risks and issues that we have talked about, there are some open source projects that do help us to deploy. So for example, there's a project called as K Agent by Solo.io. It's an CNCF project that allows you to deploy agents on Kubernetes, and the things such as like built-in observability for agents, or MCP support for agents, and then adding like an MCP gateway. These do come built in with that. And then today, like most of the traditional API gateways have also transitioned into an AI gateway. So like Kong, it was traditionally an API gateway. Now it also supports LLM calls. So it has proper
Got it.
support with built-in support for token usage. All of that can be monitored. There's also like uh, I spoke about K agent. There is this KMCP, which again is purposely built for being able to like run and secure your agents and MCP servers on Kubernetes. So I think like these are the set of tools, and these are all having architectures that's based on your traditional AI gateways and your traditional architecture. Because like if you talk about K agent, you're deploying your agent on Kubernetes, so you're still using like those similar principles of running these on pods, but the only thing that you change is your security principles and your guardrails
Yeah.
principles, and your observability principles on what are the things you are trying to look at from an agent, because those are the things that differ from traditional applications. But then the tools that you're using from a DevOps angle, they are still the same.
Got it. That was a lot of information and
Yeah.
a lot of valuable information, a lot about
Mhm.
security, like RBAC for agents, IAM for agents. Um, Maybe one last thing. If I think of the CNCF landscape, it's the same question for people wanting to dive into DevOps. This thing, this landscape is unprocessable at first sight. So the question is, where do I even start? If I want to learn about how to secure my agents, where do I start? What is a good roadmap for me to cover all those topics that we discussed?
Yeah, I mean that's an incredibly good question, and that's something that as a CNCF ambassador, I pretty much get asked at every single meetup or event that I'm representing as a CNCF ambassador. How do I navigate the entire
Yeah.
huge landscape of projects? Because it's not a static landscape. You're seeing
Yeah.
projects being added almost every single week or even month, for that matter. And new projects are coming in. And then because there is a massive life cycle, not every project just graduates, right? It takes a lot of
Correct.
years
Yeah.
for a project to graduate out of the CNCF. So generally what I recommend is first identify what is your area of interest in the CNCF, because there are so many different distinct buckets or categories of different projects. So, for example, you could be someone who is very intertwined in the observability space, or maybe you are intertwined in the AI space. So, identify your niche, and that does require you to have at least like a high level understanding of DevOps. So, you should be good with your core fundamentals of things like databases, operating systems, networking, shell scripting, Linux, right? All of those, and then have like at least a understanding of like what are the core building blocks of DevOps. So things like infrastructure as code, observability, Docker, Kubernetes, deployment,
Got it.
right? All of those. And then figure out, okay, like what may be of interest to you. Now, when it comes to agent security, again, at least having a basic understanding of what it means to secure agents should be
Mm,
good, because then what you can do is you can go into, like, let's say the cloud security tools. So CNI and all of these, because ultimately these will still be used when you are trying to deploy your agents on, let's say, on Kubernetes. And then you can
got
go
it.
into OpenFGA. So as I mentioned, because that's providing you RBAC control. So just make a list of, okay, what are the key things that you need? What are the key parts of this food recipe of securing agents? So think of securing agents as like as a final food item that you are creating at MasterChef.
Yeah.
What are the
Uh,
key
love
ingredients that
it.
you require? And then you can jump into those buckets and identify those key ingredients, because there is a, if I'm not mistaken, you could use all, of course you can uh, chat with people on the CNCF Slack if you're really confused. So the CNCF Slack is a great way to interact with people. They can always help you identify the requisite projects. But yes, like having that background done, then you can see, okay, like there's security, there is AI. You could try to identify or pinpoint specific projects. And if I'm not mistaken, the CNCF team is actually building like an AI helper that can
Okay.
give you, at least it can give you a basic idea, or it can point you to these X set of projects that might be relevant based on your query. So you could also probably ask like
That's an
ChatGPT,
excellent idea.
give it. So I mean, those are some of the ways that you could mitigate and find the most relevant set of CNCF projects for your intended use case.
Thank you so much. That was cool. And I think there are still a couple of open questions that would like just be beyond the scope of a podcast like that. If people want to follow up the conversation, you mentioned already the CNCF Slack. Is there also a way to connect to you personally? Are you on LinkedIn? Are you on X? What's your favorite way of getting in contact with people?
Yeah, I mean, I personally love to use X because I feel that the kind of organic developer conferences, sorry, developer conferences, developer
Content?
conversations that
Yeah,
you can find a lot of developer conferences as well, by the way. But
yeah.
the most organic conversations that I have on social profiles is generally on X, because LinkedIn is kind of more uh, focused on jobs and hiring. So I feel I don't have like a lot of great conversations of there, but I am active on both profiles, so you
Okay.
can connect with me on either.
Oh, perfect. We put the links to your profiles down in
Yeah.
the show notes. Shivai, thank you so much. That was a lot.
Oh yeah, a lot, but I hope everyone can take away some pointers, and I'm sure we'll probably break this down into chapters for folks to follow.
I'm sure they will. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much.